Right. So in today's session, I'm going to explain you about the ec2 board because in context to AWS solution architect associate. So before I'm getting into this ec2 board, let me explain you what are all, again, I'm just repeating what are all are we going to cover in context to the AWS solution architect associate training program. So I think I have already shown, but let me review this again. Right? So this is what generally the content which normally we discuss under AWS Solution Architect Associate, wherein we discussed about the introduction part like well architect framework, right? AWS global infrastructure, right? So this part, because understanding the architecture, again, I'm repeating, understanding the architecture for any solution is essentially important nowadays whenever we are transforming from on-premise solutions to the new applications, all these. So it's essentially important for us to understand about the architecture framework, whatever is essentially important. At the same time, whenever we are working on the cloud environment, either it can be AWS or else everything. So these services are categorized into three different parts. So one is about infrastructure as a service, whatever the required infrastructure we want, that will be covered in this. Next, second, services in context to the cloud-based services are called as platform as a service when we want to develop any solution or an application. So required some platform to do that. That is the second one. Third one, software as a service, whatever the required software we want an application to develop, right? That's where generally software as a service comes into picture. So AWS is majorly focuses more on and majorly popular focuses more on the infrastructure side because AWS majorly of infrastructure as a service, as in I have shown you some time back, right? So whenever we are working on ec2 boards, right? So or something of that sort, right? ec2, all that stuff and all, right? So understanding about AWS global infrastructure is one of the key and prominent element we need to be known with. Next, we need to discuss about what are the different architectures we have, whether it can be Amazon Simple Storage Service, which is called Amazon S3. At the same time, Amazon S3 Glacier, right? So at the same time, how are we going to choose different AWS regions for the architectures, all that? This is all something which are comes under the architecture point of view. Next thing we need to discuss about adding computer different layers. What are the different layers in the computer? In context to the infrastructure point of view, which is called Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud, right? So which is where generally these ec2 cloud services, right? So all that things will be there, right, in this regard. At the same time, Amazon machine images, which is called AMIs and all that. And one more important computer layer, which is called EBS, which is called like elastic block storage, etc. At the same time, EFS majorly focusing on the elastic file systems, which is called EFS, and followed by FSX, etc. So these are all the different computer layers which are comes under the AWS part in context to the infrastructure services or the layers we are going to develop. And there are different additional layers, data layers we have. I'm talking about the data layers part. One is about database layer considerations. What are the different databases we are going to develop and what are the different layers which are involved in it. At the same time, RDS, which is called relational database services, because when we are creating any database, like understanding about the structure of DBMS, RDBMS, and all everything is needed. So Amazon RDS is one of the key and prominent element, followed by DynamoDB, right? So all these things are comes under this category. So whenever we are going to develop this, right? So here you can see, right? So elastic IPs and all that, right? So elastic IP addresses, if you want to create over here, right? So if you want to create and allocate any kind of elastic IP addresses, or else if there is any kind of life cycle management we wants to do to maintain the elastic block storages, right? So all these things are comes under this category. This is what something which normally it comes under that. So when we are creating some data layers, whatever the required data layers we wants to create, different data layers, whatever we are supposed to cover, and whatever the data layers we want to use out of it. So in context to the databases, what is that load balancing? We are managing the load balances, right? So all these things is what something which one must be known with, one must be required with, right? So this is where generally these services and all everything comes under picture, right? So if you want to maintain the kind of database services or DynamoDB, right? So as in when I'm just showing you here, right? So DynamoDB, right? So these are all the services which are involved in it. This is where generally this DynamoDB, right? So all these DynamoDBs and all everything are working under that. Next, at the same time, AWS database migration services. This is also something which is called a data layer, adding different data layers. This is also required. Now, when it comes to the networking part in context to the Amazon Web Services, wherein there are three different cloud services we provide. One is about public cloud, second is a private cloud, and hybrid cloud. Private cloud services exclusive for the requirement of a customer. We are developing an exclusive cloud services for customer itself. This is where private cloud comes into picture. A virtual private cloud depends on the infrastructure and development of an application we are developing on. At the same time, network security in the cloud environment, followed by this, how these VPN connections, which are essentially required, followed by the kind of direct connects we have, and VPC peerings. At the same time, whatever the kind of transit gateway methods are we required to follow, followed by the kind of load balancing in context to AWS is concerned, because as I have shown you in the last time, right? So when I'm explained about that, right? So whenever I have explained about the ec2 part, here you can see there is an option for load balancing. Here you can see, yeah, load balancers and all, right? So this is where generally load balancing on AWS by creating some different load balances, whatever we have, right? So all these things we need to create a load balancer as separate, etc. All these things are comes under this category, followed by Amazon Route 53, etc. All that. Next, one of the important context and concept is called IAM, which is called Identity Access Management. Because earlier there are different tools even in the industry. Normally we use called SailPoint, all that, right? So SailPoint is one of the IAM tool we normally use. I'm not context to the AWS. In general, SailPoint is one of the IAM tool like this. Even in AWS and all, identity access management, how account users and IWS identity access management works. At the same time, how are we going to federating the users, at the same time cognition organizations. This is also something which normally we'll be discussing in it. Next, elasticity and high availability of monitoring, wherein we need to know about the Amazon CloudWatch, or else it can be a CloudTrail, or it can be scaling of the databases or EC2s, all that. Next one, automation, because when we are automating an application and all, understanding about the Elastic Beanstalk or Systems Manager or Cloud Formations are also one of the key and important element which we have to be known with. Next one, caching, right? So caching of Amazon Web Services, right? So create some different cache files, session management, at the same time creating a DynamoDB accelerators, which is called DAGs, right? Elastic caches and all, session management, managing the sessions in a proper and effective manner, right? So that it won't be any kind of delays and all everything further. This is all something which comes under the caching part. Next one, about building decoupled architectures, because whenever any architectures we are going to prepare, one of the key and important element of service will be called as SQS, which is called simple queue services. So this is one thing which normally we need to know when we are developing decoupled architectures and all that. At the same time, whatever the simple notification services or Amazon SNS are we going to create, everything comes under this category. Next, when we discuss about microservices, because earlier there are monolithic services we have, which are loosely coupled, which are tightly coupled. So what are the components we have are tightly coupled, so that if there are any changes to be made in the existing application on a particular component, you have to do the testing right from the scratch, right? So complete testing has to be done, right? So the amount of time and effort will be more. But when it comes to the microservices, we don't have an option. We don't have that problem. Because in microservices, each and every component, we create a separate microservices. If there are any changes to be made for a particular microservice and all, any particular component, if you want to make, you can focus more on that particular component only by modifying the microservices, etc. So that the existing application won't get disturbed. The existing application will run and work as usual. This is where generally microservices and all comes under picture. So for that, there are different serverless architectures and all, right? So something like AWS Fargate, AWS Lambda, right? So API gateway, step functions, right? So these are all something which are involved in it. Next one, RTP and Pro backup recovery, wherein what are the disaster planning we have, right? So what are the data replications and recovery strategies, or else at the same time, whatever the storage gateways do we have? At the same time, what are the best practices of optimization and in order to make it more effective and all everything is what something which we are learning. This is all something as to, in the beginning sessions I've explained, right? The same thing I've learned. So this is where generally this creating a load balances and all, again coming to the point, right? If you want to create any kind of load balances and all that, so we need to select what are the different load balances we have. Either it can be an application load balancer where we need to balance the application from the context of choosing the application balances by using HTTPs and all that. Next, when it comes to the network point of view, there are different TCP/IP protocols and all everything there, wherein we connect with VPCs and all. So this is all comes under the network load balances. Next, gateway load balances, majorly focusing on the kind of gateway you're going to create to deploy and develop the application and fleet, managing the fleets, right? So all these things are comes under the load balances point of view. So and this is how generally this EC2 framework, EC2 infrastructure is what something which normally we use it here. Next, and this is how generally EC2 dashboard looks like, wherein if you want to create any kind of auto scalings, or if you want to create any kind of instances and all everything, or something which normally can be created in this. So this is all about the session today, and we are going to discuss about what are how these dashboards can be created, right? So how the instances to be created, right? So how these elastic IPs to be created, right? So what are the different IPs are we going to create, right? It can be public IP insights, followed by the kind of global events, whatever we are about to maintain, followed by the kind of events, whatever we are about to maintain. So all these things are we going to discuss in the tomorrow session, right? So tomorrow I'm going to explain about the those points, right? So the regions and all the global regions, at the same time exploring the global regions. Followed by there are a couple of elements which in context to the gateway which we need to be learned with. This is all something which normally we are going to discuss in tomorrow's session, so that we will be knowing, right? So we must be knowing about the containers also, right? So this is all something which we are discussing in tomorrow's session, right? So this is all about session for today. If you have any questions, now you can ask.